Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Older Vermonters Caucus. Thanks for being here today. Before we get started, I was wondering if anyone had any announcements or anything they wanted to talk about before we kind of get started. I know there's going to be a press conference on Friday at noon. Do you want, Meg, do you want to say anything about that?
Sure. Where's the camera?
Oh, right there.
Oh, okay.
Good question.
So the Long-Term Care Crisis Coalition is holding a press conference on Friday at noon in the Cedar Creek Room. We would love to have any advocates or legislators who want to come stand with us. And there'll be a variety of both legislative speakers, advocates, and organizations talking about what we learned from the rate studies that came out in February and the crisis that we're having right now with the broad spectrum of home and community-based services. So that's this Friday, the 24th at noon. It's also Cove's Day in the card room. So if you come earlier, you can come interact with some folks in the card room here as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for setting that up. It's great to kind of raise awareness of the issues that are affecting older Vermonters here and just to keep that going here in our state house. So thank you for putting that together. So today, are there any other announcements before we get started here? I didn't know if anyone else. I'll make one quick one that we're working on the budget letter in the Human Services Committee to go out to appropriations, and I think we're going to have kind of some discussion on it tomorrow in committee, and then it'll probably be sometime next week that we'll start seeing drafts of it come around. So you can take a look once we get it going. So today we have Kylie Kuiper, who's the long-term care ombudsman, and she's going to talk about what's going on there and just kind of give us an overview. It's been a while since we've heard from anybody from that department. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen here, see if I can get that to work.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay.
Great. I can't see people online, but can you see that she shared screen? Is that working for everybody? Yeah, okay. I can actually see a few people on my computer, so good. Okay, thank you. Just making sure. We had such technical difficulties last week. I'm glad we're not this week.
So again, my name is Kylie Kuiper, and I'm the new state long-term care ombudsman. I took over from Sean Londergan last April. So I'm just going to start by giving a little background on our program and the things that we do. So the federal government began long-term care ombudsman programs in every state back in the 70s. It was in reaction to concerns about the care that people were receiving in nursing homes. The program started in Vermont in 1975. In the beginning, it was concentrated on nursing homes, and then they added residential care homes and assisted living facilities. And now our program also covers people who receive long-term care through the Choices for Care program. And the Vermont Ombudsman Program is housed under Vermont Legal Aid. That's been the case for about 15 years now, I think. As you can imagine, our clients are some of the most isolated and vulnerable members of our state, but we believe strongly in their right to dignity, privacy, and the ability to direct their lifestyle and care. Our program provides person-centered advocacy for long-term care residents in order to make sure that their rights are enforced and they receive the care that they need and have an improved quality of life. We always take direction from the resident or their legal representative. So sometimes we might hear from family members who believe that that the person receiving long-term care isn't making good decisions, but our role is to advocate for the resident and what the resident wants. And as a part of that, we serve to empower individuals. Our main role is to identify, investigate, and resolve complaints about long-term care. These complaints can be made by residents, they can be made by their family members, their friends, and we also sometimes hear from staff of facilities or people who provide other services for people who receive care, who have concerns about the care they're receiving. Most of the complaints that we receive have to do with long-term care providers and facilities, but we do sometimes deal with long-term care issues that interact with public agencies, health and social service agencies, and legal representatives. And these are complaints that adversely affect the individual's health, safety, welfare, or their rights, including their legal and medical decision-making. In addition to that, we also monitor facilities. We are responsible for visiting each licensed long-term care facility at least 2 times per year, and that's to monitor the conditions in the facility and to speak to residents to make sure they're aware of our program and also to hear feedback on them from them on how their care is going. We also educate individuals and their family members and also staff of facilities about residents' rights and good care practices. And finally, we also have a duty to improve the long-term care system through systemic advocacy. As I'm sure everyone on this call is aware, COVID-19 drastically increased long-term care challenges. It increased isolation of residents, both because it exacerbated the staffing shortage, and also many residents and long-term care recipients weren't able to receive their usual visits from their family members and friends. Also, for those same reasons, it increased neglect and it caused a lot of chaos in the system because there was constantly shifting rules and guidelines about what the providers were expected to do for long-term care recipients. And there was a lack of systemic accountability because it was difficult for agencies like APS and Survey and Certification to access residents and follow up on complaints. Now I'd like to just talk a little bit about my team. We have 5 local long-term care ombudsmen that are each responsible for different areas of the state. Katrina Bomig covers Windham and Windsor counties. Michelle Carter covers Washington and Addison counties. Dawn Donahue covers Essex, Orleans, Caledonia, Orange, and Lamoille counties. Alicia Moyer covers Chittenden, Franklin, and Grand Isle counties. And Carrie White covers Rutland and Bennington counties. So I'm going to start with a little bit about Katrina Bomig. She's been with us since 2016, and she cares about, in particular, about helping her clients feel heard. She says, when I listen to a client who has not been heard in some time, and when I help a client to find a new way to communicate, that is my greatest accomplishment. Michelle Carter has been with us the longest. She's been with Vermont Legal Aid since 1994, and she was actually an ombudsman for several years before that. One of her recent victories is that during the COVID-19 pandemic, she convinced an facility to allow visitation for an ailing client so that she could visit with her daughter and her granddaughter before she passed away. Dawn Donahue has been with us since 2021. One of her recent victories is twice defending a resident against an involuntary facility discharge. The facility had said that they are trying to run a business and need able-bodied residents, and she helped the resident stay where he wanted to be. Alicia Moyer has been with us since the end of 2019. She helped a client who had a broken hospital bed for many months, and the durable medical equipment provider was refusing to replace it. She worked with another project, Sherry Burnell, who's with another Vermont Legal Aid project, the Disability Law Project, and together they helped the client obtain a new bed. The client also had a malfunctioning oxygen compressor, and which was also being refused replacement, and she helped convince the vendor to replace the compressor so the client could breathe. And finally, Carrie White was with us from 2001 to 2015 and then returned in 2021. One of her recent victories is she had a client who was in a facility that the client wanted to return home, but the facility didn't believe that the client was capable of living on her own at home. Carrie supported the resident to return home because that's what the client wanted. And they were able to get the services she needed in her home and help the client rehabilitate so she could walk again. Carrie says, we believed in her, we took direction from her, and she feels in control of her life. All right, I was also going to talk about the long-term care Medicaid personal needs allowance a little bit. Should I take any questions or move right on to that?
It's up to you. Anyone? Yeah, we'll take some questions if anyone has any questions on the long-term care ombudsman. Actually, I wanted to point out, you didn't talk much about funding, so I'm going to point that out because it is, we did meet and I noticed that you have been level funded in this program for a really long time. And I think that, that's something that I think we see across many of the agencies that are providing services to older Vermonters. And so I think they'll maybe have some discussion about that as we move through the budget process. But, I know that you were talking about this particular program. Do you remember how long? You told me at one point.
So in the past 7 years with our federal and state funding together, we have had a total of 2% budget increase, and that's total, that's not each year. And as far as our state funding goes, I could look back 10 years and we hadn't received any increase in state funding through that time. I don't know how long it's been, yeah.
And their state funding is $73,000. So just want to put that out there. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
So the long-term care Medicaid personal needs allowance, for those who aren't familiar with it, it applies to nursing home residents who are on long-term care Medicaid. And it's the amount of their own income that they are allowed to keep to pay for personal needs. So everything else goes to their care. So their personal needs allowance pays for things like clothing, glasses, gifts, pet supplies. It pays for hearing aid batteries, any, meals outside of the facility. There's a lot of things that people would expect to want in their lives that they use this for. It has only been increased twice since 2001. It was raised once in 2021 to $72.66 per month. And it was raised again last year to be implemented by 2024 by another 10%. So what my program is asking for is so we don't have to worry about the personal needs allowance constantly falling behind inflation, to have in statute a permanent, regular, yearly cost of living increase. We propose that it be tied to the consumer price index. I think Representative Noyes thought maybe it should be tied to the nursing home yearly increase, which would also be fine, but just so that it keeps up with inflation. Are there any questions about that?
I don't see any hands up, but I did miss one in the chat. Is this Janet?
This is Mary Alice.
Oh, hey, Mary Alice. Go ahead.
Could I ask, as someone who was a former nursing home social worker when Michelle Carter was the long-term care ombudsman, I just wanted to know how much are people allowed to keep in personal savings? Like it used to be $2,000. It's probably much more.
I'm sorry, I don't know that number off the top of my head. And Mike, do you happen to, for people that are on Medicaid, is that?
I think the assets test may still be $2,000. That's what I don't know for sure, but I think it's still exceedingly low.
Yeah,
Eh,
which is a federal guideline, correct? Or is that state?
I think we're talking about the asset test for long-term care Medicaid.
It's 2,000 for an individual, 3,000 for a couple.
Thank
And
you.
Is that set by the feds or by the state?
Don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question.
That'd be a good question.
Google
Okay.
didn't tell me that fast, but I,
I got to imagine that it's something that we could ask the state to ask
Okay.
permission from the feds to
Yeah.
address, because I don't think it's, yeah.
Right.
Our elder law project is the expert on long-term care Medicaid, but I should.
Yeah, no problem. We'll get back on that one. Good question. Thank you.
I had a question.
Yeah, of course.
I just wondered if
wanna stop
the
sharing.
monthly allowance amount now is even close to a reasonable amount. Because I love the idea of setting it to be predictable, but I don't want us to be like, let's set it to be predictable based on this amount that doesn't work. And then we hear, okay, it's gone up by the percentage it needs each year, but we started, I mean, to me, I'm not even sure my dad could get enough hearing aid batteries for $92 a month based on, so I'm just wondering what the process of setting that amount was, if that was state or federal, and like, can we make sure that if we get it to be set for the future, that it's a reasonable amount?
I think that's a very good question. I believe it was originally a federal, I mean, like 15, 20 years ago, a federal number that then didn't have any mechanism for automatic increases. Some states chose to start increasing it with federal funds. And I haven't done the calculations myself. I know we are already behind inflation from the last increase, since we've had very high inflation in the last couple of years. And my guess would be that we're far behind inflation from the original. And I don't know how it was calculated, what the original amount was, if that was sufficient. So I think that's a very good question.
And is there a bill that's active right now that's working on this, or is this something you're planning on putting in, or?
No, there's no bill. You know, I think it probably will be some discussion in our committee on our budget letter. So,
Thank you.
so I want to just.
can I just
okay,
say one?
go
Yeah,
ahead,
there is a
please.
very helpful, and Kelly, if you want, I can send it to you. There's a Kaiser Family Foundation study on the asset limit and how all the states are handling it. So,
Good to know.
yeah, it's
I
my.
have seen that.
Yeah, have you seen that? Yeah, yeah. It's my first. That's always my go-to is these guys because they're really good. But I think it may be a federal issue, but
Okay. Good.
some have a higher one than we do. Looks like.
Josh, I see your hand up.
Yes. So a quick question. I just was curious, would this also affect other folks that aren't necessarily nursing home residents that would maybe be at home or maybe like the adult family care programs? Or would that just be specifically the idea of that would just specifically be for nursing home residents?
I believe it's specifically for nursing home residents and that there's a different calculation for people who receive lower levels of care, because I'm still learning about this, but that it's like the room and board is calculated separately, and that it, for at least some of those groups, I understand that there is an automatic annual cost of living increase. So nursing home residents are kind of the exception.
Okay, cool. All right.
I do want to go back to the long-term care ombudsman discussion because there was a question in the chat that I missed. So are assisted living facilities visited twice a year, or does this apply only to nursing homes?
It's all licensed facilities, so assisted living facilities should be included in that. Yeah.
Okay. And then you mentioned systemic advocacy. Do any of our nursing homes or ALFs have resident councils?
Yes, they do have resident councils, and we communicate with residents councils. That's definitely something that we try to do. It was obviously more of a challenge during the COVID pandemic, but that's absolutely something that we support.
Great, thank you. All right. Any other questions from the room or online? All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today and presenting, and appreciate your time. I'm going to turn it over now to Mike Fisher, who is going to present on, take it from there.
Present on
I think you got a bunch of stuff.
a bunch of stuff. My first question is, Dan, I just emailed you.
I sent it out, so if anyone wants to check their email.
Right. So I'm going to reference a
flyer.
one-pager. I thought instead of me trying to get on Zoom and taking up the screen, I would just send it to everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Mike Fisher. I'm the state healthcare advocate. Also work at Vermont Legal Aid. Both Kylie and I, through a contract process, get to work for a private nonprofit and do work that is very much framed out in state statute. And so, my job, along with the team, is to advocate on behalf of Vermonters' access to care, quite as broadly as that, is to help people get the care they need. And I'll just mention, we run a helpline. We have 8 lay advocates supervised by an attorney who are on the phones today, taking Vermonters' phone calls who are having some kind of challenge getting the care they need. They might not exactly understand it, but something's not working in the healthcare system for them. And guess what? It's pretty darn common. So over the last couple of years, the Advocate's Office has been pushing at the Medicare, Medigap open enrollment period. And I'm telling a little bit of the backstory to how Act 99 report came out this year. We have been pushing for improving access to Medigap plans. And that advocacy resulted in a work group that past year that some people in this group, I'm sure, attended, and ultimately in the production of this Act 99 report. I just mention it. I know what it's like as a legislator. I'm a former legislator. I know what it's like to ask for a report and then need to find time to look at it. There's a lot of work that went into this thing. And I have a real fear that not a moment of committee time will be put into looking at the conclusions. And so I am advocating for both House Healthcare and Senate Health and Welfare to take some time to look at the findings of this report. And I mention it here in that same vein. It does highlight a number of problems in the structure of our health insurance for older and disabled Vermonters, for people on Medicare, and a number of deficiencies. And so let me just mention one or two of them, and then I'll get to the main topic here. One of them is that I think is glaring, that is found in this report, is the fact that we rate the under 65 Medicare group and the over 65 Medicare group separately. So in other words, we're taking all of the disabled, under 65 disabled folks, and rating them separately. In other words, we're costing out the cost of care for that group separately for the over 65s. And guess what? They're a lot more expensive. And therefore the rates are tremendously more expensive. And guess what? A very small percentage of the under 65 group buys supplemental healthcare insurance. If you're on Medicare and you don't have supplemental insurance, you're highly exposed. You're very exposed, very likely to have medical debts, medical expenses that you can't pay. And that's bad for consumers, that's bad for providers. And so we believe that it makes sense to combine those two pools. And I'm sure that there was an estimation that it would result in an increased cost for the older group, the over 65 group, of about 3%, and a decreased cost for the under 65 group. I can't remember, the 35-ish%. That was one area that was glaring to us. Other area that's glaring to us is the lack of regulation of brokers and their agents who are selling Part C plans. And that's something that the state can do, and we think the state should do. Brokers seem to be hiring agents who are outside of state regulation to do a lot of the marketing of Part C. I think we all hear horror stories about deceptive advertising and bullying, frankly, bullying like advertising efforts in the marketing of Part C. So we think we could do a better job as a state regulating that marketplace.
And Part C is Medicare Advantage.
Thank you. Everything in Medicare, everyone, I'm sure most people in this room know this, that Medicare is great. Everything has at least two names, so just to confuse everybody. Yes. I tend to call it Part C because I think Medicare Advantage is a marketing term. And then lastly, I just want to mention, we continue to believe that there is some opportunity to adjust the Medigap open enrollment periods. Particularly, I'll focus particularly for those folks who discover that their Part C Advantage plan is not meeting their healthcare needs after 1 year. And so we think that's something that that the state could do that would stop people from feeling locked into a Medicare Part C plan that is not meeting their healthcare needs. We get calls regularly at the advocate's office. I'm sure others can share this from people who, when you're healthy, when you don't need care, all you think about is the cost of your premium. And so you might say, hey, my health insurance is great. It's cheap. And then you need care and you discover, you know what? There's no network for me. You know what? It doesn't cover the things that I was told it was going to cover and other problems. So we don't think it makes sense to lock people in for the rest of their lives into a health insurance product that's not working for them. The last area that is recognized in this report and what I really want to talk about is the Medicare Savings Plan. But I want to pause there for a second and just I want to recognize there's experts in this room who know more than me. And so I want to give people an opportunity to either ask questions to the group or to me or comments about the stuff I've already talked about.
So I have a quick question about allowing people to change plans. Is that something we can do at the state level, or is this a federal? Like if we extend the open enrollment period 365 days
Yeah.
for people who are.
As New York does.
As New York does.
So I think that's the answer to your question.
I think it does.
Yes.
And so what would be the reason that that would not be something that we would pursue in Vermont?
So I think that, let me put it this way. We have proposed an annual open enrollment period consistent with Part C open enrollment periods for Medigap. And so in other words, at the same time of year, every year, people would have an opportunity, like they can in the rest of the health insurance world, to change their plan. And we do that, we sort of lock people into a period when they can buy insurance, because from a public policy perspective, because we want to avoid people waiting until they get sick, sitting on the sidelines, waiting until they need care before they buy insurance. So it's a basic tool to prevent what's called adverse selection. It's interesting that in the world of Medicare, that concern about adverse selection has led us to a policy where we say, hey, you have 6 months to buy a Medigap plan. The federal minimum standard, which is what Vermont has, you have 6 months to buy a Medigap plan. And if you don't do it during that 6 month period, you're locked out of a guaranteed issue, community rated product for the rest of your life. All because of that concern about adverse selection. That's what our current policy is. You have a 6 month period after you buy your Part B plan, And that's
Yeah.
when you can take action.
I would just add to that continuous enrollment that you described, that New York gets even more expensive
Yeah.
for the state. So what we proposed was a shorter period of time, but that was still too expensive for the state.
Yeah.
So there is cost associated with it.
There is an argument on the part of the carriers that it will raise rates because that it will
Right.
raise rates.
I should say exacerbated by people leaving that market to go into Medicare Advantage. So we're back to the Part C discussion is related to this
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment about Part C?
Yeah, of course.
Please.
Jill Olson, I work for home health and hospice agencies, and I will just say that Part C plans are, some of them are fine. Some of them pay providers very, very poorly. There is one in Vermont that is the largest, that is a particularly poor payer of home health agencies, and it's probably the single most biggest financial pressure right now on agencies is migration to Medicare Advantage or to Part C. So we have a lot of concerns about that, and there's very little that we can do to ensure that those national plans pay reasonable rates. There's not really a policy solution.
On the state level.
Even on the federal level, there's really nothing proposed. There's sort of nothing to fight for yet. I'm working on that with my national because I feel like they need to do some work.
We'll be here coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the final area that I think is glaring to us about the sort of the lay of the land for Vermonters on Medicare is the tremendously low support for low-income Vermonters. Vermont, like other states, has a program called the Medicare Savings Plans, and there's different tiers to that, but the tier that covers cost sharing, the tier that covers the 20% exposure that you have on Medicare caps out at 100% of the federal poverty level. So a family of two making over $18,310 a year gets no cost sharing support. $18,000. That's just a phenomenal statement. And so folks who are just above that level, who need even very, very modest care, get stuck with bills they can't possibly pay. And by the way, every one of our hospitals has free care policies that cover that. So all of those costs go to the bottom line. If they apply for free care and are granted free care by the hospital, go to the bottom line of the hospital. And same thing for the FQHCs. It does lock them out of a lot of providers that don't have free care policies. But so that's a glaring problem in our healthcare system. And I'll just say one more. The top of our current Medicare savings plan caps out at 135% of the federal poverty level. And so for a family of two making over $24,700, they get no supports. And just, again, I don't know how a family of two is making it on $24,000. I mean, it's, in my mind, very, very low income. And so those folks are getting no supports for Medicare premiums. And I had it open on my computer a second ago, but my computer went to sleep. But I'll just say the cost of Medicare premiums on top of the cost of Medicare cost sharing, the cost sharing is prohibitive. And so very much the same dynamic. This is a group of low-income Vermonters on Medicare who we think have very, very poor access to care. So as a result, we have been promoting and increasing our Medicare savings plan eligibility and have promoted a bill that Dan has been a part of working on and on the Senate side, Senator Cummings, that would raise the level of MSP that covers cost sharing up to 150% of the federal poverty level and raise the top level up to 185%. And I'll fully recognize that even those numbers are too low, that we should be going higher. But we thought that was a reasonable proposal to put forward to try and improve access to care for Vermonters who are on Medicare. It's not cheap. Hey, legislators, heads up, this is an expensive bill. We think it's probably about $30 million in state monies, along with the federal match, to do this proposal. But I'll just say again, it at least would draw down federal dollars to help pay for this care instead of leaving many Vermonters without the ability to get the care they need and leaving many Vermont providers without the ability to get paid.
Because I think ultimately that ends up what happening. If someone needs, long-term healthcare and they have no assets and they have no access to these programs, that ends up with the providers kind of stuck with the bill.
Yes, both. Yes, for sure. Lots of people go get care and they can't pay for it, and the provider is stuck with not getting paid. And lots of people will not go get care because they don't want debt, and they love their provider and they care about it. They think they got great care and they don't want to leave, and they know they can't pay for it. And so they say, I'm just not going to go. It's exactly what we are trying not to do in healthcare, in all of our healthcare reform efforts. We want people to get the care they need when they need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mary.
I just wanted to make another, in the AAAs where we have the SHIP programs providing the Medicare counseling, education, and outreach. I feel like I'm obsessed with Medicare Advantage today, but even what we've noticed, folks who have qualified for these Medicare savings plans under the very low income levels we currently have been lured away from those plans and entered into Medicare Advantage plans. So even when they were receiving this coverage and their co-insurance paid, we've had people leave those plans anyway, and we've had to figure out how to disenroll them and bring them back into Part A and B again.
And Mary makes an important point. All of these dynamics that I just described, all of these families can easily be lured into a substandard Part C plan with the promise of premium-free or very low premium coverage and the promise of more care than we think they're going to get. So this proposal, I'm sorry, I never even held this up.
Wave it around a little.
You're fine.
It should all be in your inboxes. I emailed it out.
This proposal that we tried to describe in this one pager is indeed puts a backstop for some Vermonters to prevent them from needing to go to Part C or feeling like they need to go to Part C. Let me just point to this one chart here. By the way, I made copies, so why don't I hand them around? We were attempting to show with these two bars what the level of coverage is for people under 65 or not disabled. And then what happens when they, happy birthday, you're 65, and what level of support there is for cost sharing in particular. And so the frame of the bill that I recognized is not going far enough is to attempt to level that off so that there isn't this giant cliff when you turn 65 or become disabled. So.
And I had a constituent actually reach out to me who waited to take retirement so that they would get more money. And it put them over so that they weren't eligible for any of these. Mm. And so it just, someone can get caught in this without even thinking about it. They're like, oh, I'm going to work longer so that I can draw down more, and then makes them ineligible for services when they really are not making enough anyways to pay for their health care in their retirement. I sent them to you, Mike.
Thank you.
No, I talked to them.
I think it's probably worth recognizing, sort of brutally recognizing that, hey, I like to think I've got some influence on the building. The healthcare advocate moves, pretty effectively around the building. We get some stuff. The advocate doesn't get a $30 million increase to base. That's a big ask. And so, the prospects of leveling off this cliff is really should be considered a long-term effort that's going to need buy-in from the administration. And so I say that to this group that I think we launched this effort this year. We think it's a multi-year effort.
And that is a really good point. When you talk about ongoing money, it's a lot harder than the one time. And this would not fall into any one time category. It's ongoing. So your strategy of, taking small amounts at it and moving that cliff over time is probably more likely to happen than for us even to take this small step of going to 150% of poverty, over 100 on the lowest one.
Yep.
If you could, maybe we're talking about moving it up to 105% or something like that, over so much over time.
Yep.
Do you have any number of how many people are, how many Vermonters are in this situation? How many people could it potentially impact?
I don't off the top of my head, but I think, I don't know. Actually, I should say.
We had some numbers from JFO.
As a part of this Act 99 report, DEVA did ask their actuary to do some costing out of a few different MSP proposals, not this one, by the way. And so they did back into an estimation of the number of lives that would be impacted.
I'll look there.
It is in here.
And where can someone find that report? Is that on the healthcare?
It's on the legislative webpage under reports.
Okay. Gotcha. Under your name or under?
No, it's from
DFR.
DFR. Okay. And if anyone can't find it and they want to find it, they can email me or sure they can email you, Mike, and we can send them the link.
Yep.
All right. Does anyone have any questions?
Mary Alice.
All right. I think Mary Alice, do you have a question for us?
I don't have a thing on my Chromebook that I can raise my hand.
Well, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I just had a question because I just heard that United Healthcare is backing out of everything that Vermont is doing. And I pay $244 a month for co-insurance, Part B, with United Healthcare so that I get wonderful coverage, pays my co-insurance, my copay and my deductible. And I'm just wondering, does that mean that I will no longer be able to get help through Central Vermont Medical Center or UVM?
So I think, I believe, and someone correct me if you know differently, I believe that the news that came out yesterday was that United Healthcare's commercial market, that is not its Part C or supplemental.
That's right.
Is no longer agreeing to work with the UVM Health Network.
Oh, so it doesn't include supplemental?
No.
Because that's what I have with them as supplemental, and they'll continue with supplemental. Thank you. And thank you so much, Mike, for your work on this. We've got to get something up. I'm just above the poverty level and maybe about 185%. So you wonder why people die young. The poor people die young. Old, a lot of wealthy people die very old because they've had all this wonderful health care. My take.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming today.
Thanks for
Thanks for
hosting.
your input today and your presentations. Really appreciate it. And we'll be back next week. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a
Thank you
great
very
day.
much, everybody.
Nice.